Hey everybody, so today we are behind the desk and I'm going to talk about my top 5 tips whenever I'm color grading footage. Right now I have open Premiere Pro, that's what I edit off of, and I'm just going to walk through kind of my process for what I think is important, my top 5 tips for whenever I'm color grading anything. So right here I have Premiere Pro open and I have 3 clips that I'm going to kind of showcase. And some of them are there's 2 outside ones. There's one that's a interview setup. I tried to pick 2 outside ones that are a little bit more difficult in the environment, and then the interview setup is your more basic, more controlled lighting, but could be a little boring. So how can we make it better? Okay. So first, I have open here my clips. I like to use the color panel here. This is really nice for me. So I click on the color panel and it kind of opens up my preferred way to view whenever I'm doing color grading. Now, right now, I'm editing I have a monitor here, and typically I used to use that, but I'm actually using my computer, my MacBook Pro M1 Max right now instead of this nice monitor. And I'll talk a little bit about that, why I'm actually doing that. Tip number 1 for me is using the waveforms. So that is a super huge thing that I use whenever I'm color grading. And let me talk a little bit about that. But first, let's start off with my first step that I always do after I have the footage, and that is put a adjustment layer on top of my clips. So going down here, you're getting an adjustment layer. You're going to put that right on top. I have my Lumetri color here. I like to use this panel for my LUT input. Some people do things differently. This is just how I do it. I have all my little LUTs in a special place. So the LUT that I'm using is the Phantom LUTs. They're commonly used LUTs created by a very fine gentleman, and I'll link his info below in the description if you want to look at these LUTs or buy these LUTs. I highly recommend them. But these are specifically made for Sony cameras, so this is what I'm using. Now, this first shot is actually with a Sony FX3, so I'm going here into Phantom LUT, and I'm looking at my A7S III, which is kind of similar to the FX3, and I'm going to use the Utopia Legacy. Legacy is just a little bit more contrast. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. We'll put that on there. Now, these other 2 clips are actually shot on the FX6. So I'm actually going to put the other version of the LUT that is for the FX6. So let's go get that on there. Utopia Legacy for the FX6. Boom. It's not a huge difference, but it adds a little bit. So, okay, so I have these images pulled up here, and let's try. I'm going to try and quickly. I'm going to try and explain to you why I think the adjustment, or why the waveform is so important. So, first thing I do whenever I have my clips, I have my adjustment layers on top with my LUT that I'm using, is I then go to the clip and I add any corrections that I need to. So based off of this waveform for me is how I'm gauging how much, do I need to brighten up the image? Do I need to darken it? Is it too bright? Is there something clipping? And that's what this waveform does. If I go over here to the whites, whenever it's at 100, most of the time I'm losing that information. Whenever I'm, all the way here in the blacks, and this is super low, that means it's the dark part of the image. So 100 is the brightest part, 0 is the darkest part of the image. So let's bring this all back to normal. And what this helps me with when I first start is it helps me with contrast. So I look at this guy, and what I do is I'm using these tools right here that kind of give me the look and the feel that I want. I typically like the images a little bit more contrasty, but I like to make sure that my image here is kind of spread apart. What I mean by that is that when you have less contrast, it's together and it's more flat. When you add contrast, you have your highest points here and tend to be in the 90ish section, and here below 10. So I like to use the blacks, bring up the whites just a little bit. Sometimes, like, what helps add contrast if this slider is too much, just like bringing down the shadows, kind of like pulls down the image. And then, yeah, some people like want to max this out and be at 100. I like to keep kind of these numbers are called IRE numbers, or at least that's what I think they are. I like to kind of bring that right below 100 at 95, sometimes depending on what you're filming, at 90. So we're going to keep that right here. The next thing that's super important is the image color corrected? Is it a little bit blue? Is it too warm? And what do I need to do to change that? Now, this is really simple. The things that I do are simple, they're not complex. So I think, this is an outside setting. I don't want it to be blue. I want it to be just a little bit warmer. So I'm going to bring up kind of the warm tones. Let's make this panel bigger so that we can see it. We can really make sure that we see this athlete. Yeah, that's kind of looking nice. And then is it green? I don't know. Maybe I'll like move. Sometimes the Sony image can be a little green, so I'll add like a little magenta to it. But maybe that's too much. Let's see. Yeah, maybe it's like a 1 on the scale here. Like barely any magenta. It's like the most finest adjustments. So I'm making this image look and feel a little bit warmer. But that kind of brings up my next thing that's important. When I'm color correcting, yes, I want the whites to be white. I want to make sure that they're white. But many times I want to make sure that the skin is looking nice. That's one of the most important things to me. So I will color that image based on the skin. And if I feel like that the skin is too much of one color, I go here in the curves and I'll add some saturation. Maybe I'll add saturation here. Oh, that's way too much. Maybe I'll take it away. Or I'll come into the hue versus hue, and maybe it's a little bit too magenta or too red. So like I'll pull a little bit of that away and add some green. Or it's too green, I'll pull that up and then add a little bit of red. So there's like the very far ends, and really you're making the most finest adjustments to kind of correct things. I think she already looks pretty good, so I'm going to keep this away. So you have your waveform, you then go and you color correct, you make sure that the skin looks good, and then I go then back to the contrast. I go back to here and I make sure that my contrast looks good. So I come in, I think it looks still a little bit flat, and I'll use this as much as I can, but if that doesn't work, what I'll do is I'll come to the curves here. I use this little guy here, and I put a little S curve. I'll put a point here at the bottom, point here at the top. Maybe I'll just pull the blacks down. This is where the blacks are in the image at this section, and then the high points are like where the brightest parts are. So I'll pull that down. Maybe I'll add that up. This kind of curve is almost this RGB curve, and you can break this up into different colors. I'm doing all the colors. That's why it's white. This curve is almost like a form of doing the same thing I was doing here, the contrast. I'm adding more contrast, but I now have very specific adjustments that I can put on the image wherever I want it to be. So I'm going to bring this down just a little bit. And this is what this kind of curve did. It's very fine little adjustment, but just enough to where she just kind of pops. You're just like, yeah, it looks nice. This is what it looked like at the very beginning. So this is what it looked like at the very beginning. Very flat image, outdoors, pretty nicely exposed. This is what it looked like with the LUT on. The LUT kind of didn't do that much, which is was surprising. But that's whenever LUTs can't save you. You need to be able to understand how to manipulate your image in order for it to look good. And so after we put the Lumetri color on, that's what we get here. And I think it looks nice. I like things to be a little bit more warm and just kind of pop a little bit. Let's look, maybe there's too much magenta in here. So yeah, I'm gonna take this magenta off. I kind of felt like it was too red here, like with these other people, these little red particles. And maybe I just think that it's too red in general. And I think that maybe comes up to our next point. And that number 5 is small adjustments. So small adjustments are now that you think that the image is perfect the way that you want it to, exposure is good, contrast is good. What are things in the image that you could change and maybe make better? For this, I think that maybe I could take a little bit of this red away, but hopefully it doesn't take some of the skin red away. So I'll go to curves. I'll go to saturation. I'll select this little red dot right here. Let's see what it looks like all the way down. Yeah. See how that kind of helps? Like it kind of makes her tongue kind of stick out there. But I kind of feel like it naturally doesn't probably look that red. So I'm going to bring it down just a little bit. So this is before, this is after, very small adjustment, but I think it's worth it so that her skin pops out more and you don't have this neon red in the background that the LUT kind of is giving you. But okay. All right. So I kind of gave my points here, but now I'm just going to walk through this next image, kind of doing the same thing. Let me reset this. All right. So I reset this image. Now, first thing first, we get here. This is what the image looks like. Whenever I look at this, I'm already like, dang, that shirt is kind of blown out and kind of worried about it. So you can see here in the image, we still have, like, if you look at the waveform, because remember, number one thing that we do, and that's important to us, is a waveform. We look at the waveform, it still has a good amount of information here. It's not like clipping. Usually a clipping is like just a flat line. It's like information is lost. And it's probably a little overexposed. So I wish that maybe it was a little like right here if I were to expose it on my camera, but that's okay. We're going to start here. So first thing I do is, remember we put the LUT on, making that come back out, and man, it's too bright. So I'll bring down the highlights, starting off, and I just kind of start playing with these levers here. See what I can do, see what it gives me. Let's bring down the highlights maybe more. Pull down the shadows. Maybe make it pop just a bit. And there's not much I can do to make this shirt look, perfectly exposed. There's a point where you just have to accept that it's going to be a little bit brighter, but that's what the environment was. It was sunny, it was hot. It makes sense. So okay. So this is where we're starting off. Got started with the waveforms here. Now let's look at the skin. Let's look at the, is this color, this image, is it the way I want it to be? It looks color corrected to me. It's pretty nice in the whites, but again, it's outside. It's hot in the middle of summer in Uganda. Let's make it a little bit warmer. So just warm it up some. Some people, if you are coloring in DaVinci Resolve, which is where I learned how to do most of my techniques of understanding the waveforms, stuff like that, they're going to probably see some of the things that I'm doing and they're not going to like it because I'm using these temperature controls and tint, and they're not using their cool little dials. But that's okay. That for me, I'm okay with not using that and being absolutely perfect with some of these parts of the image, to where maybe I'm making a little bit more of a color casted look here, but for the majority of it, it's giving me the look that I want in the feel, and I'm happy with that. And so I just roll with it. So bringing this down. This is a hard image. Like, I want it to be contrasty, but I don't, because then if I do, this is going to be so bright. All right, so now I'm kind of at a point where I want it to pop more, so I'm going to go to my little curves here. And I'll give it its last kind of touch of pop. And maybe I'll add more contrast. Maybe I should pull up the shadows and pull this down. I don't know. Let's see. You just kind of play around to get to a point where you like seeming. This is where we were before. For me, I like to pull down those highlights. That's kind of nice. What's it look like when we play it? For this, I think we're good. We'll stick with that. One thing that I do sometimes is I'll start with an image, and maybe by the end of editing a whole film or sequence of things, I realize that it's too contrasty or it's too much of this. And I'll go back and make more adjustments and tweaks. But I think this is a good place, and I'm happy with this image standalone. Now let's go to a interview setup. This interview setup was, it looks pretty good. I think that it's kind of flat in some ways, and so I want to try and make it stand out the best I can. So how can I make this stand out using the two tips that we talk about: the waveform, the color correction, the skin? Is the skin good? Is the contrast good? And then are there any other things that I can do, small adjustments in the image to then make this interview stand out and make it better? So I'm going to look at that. Starting out first, we had the adjustment put on. Look at this. This window right here is blown out, which the only thing I really could have done whenever I set up the lighting for this is maybe I put something back there like a little shade or something to make that better. At the time, and what I had with me, I didn't have that available. So I just accepted the fact this is going to be blown out, but that's okay. It's going to be okay. So I'm going to pull down the highlights just a bit. We're going to talk a little bit more about this right here, his skin, where you would like this skin to be on the waveform here in just a bit. All right, we're pulling this down. There we go. It's starting to look okay. Maybe it's a little bit too okay. So waveform now, color temp is really good. Should I, maybe I should cool it down a little bit. It looks kind of warm in there. So now, as I'm cooling it down, it looks kind of green. So now I'm going to add a little bit of magenta. Now his skin's kind of changing. So you're like, oh God, what do I do? But I kind of like the colors I'm getting more. Maybe I make it more warm so it's not so bad. I think some of this green might be, maybe it's coming from outside where you have those trees that are really reflecting. So you just get this green cast. It looks pretty good, but it doesn't look perfect. I'm just going to keep tweaking. Just keep moving along, keep doing things. Let's go to the curves. See if we can make it look nice. Look nicer. Yeah, he's kind of starting to pop. This video, the purpose of it is it's kind of more of it's a story about him. It's a little bit more of a corporate setting. It doesn't need to be extremely dramatic by any means. So I try to make sure that the images pop, but I think that I have a tendency to like things that kind of pop to really stand out. And so that's what I'm trying to do here. This is hard because I'm like having a difficult time making his skin look the way I want to, but also the background look the way I want to. He looks a little magenta on the face. So there's a couple things that I can do. And one thing that's important that I always try to do with the image, and this is important, this is something that like can make your things stand apart, is that most people don't understand that the skin should be a certain exposure depending on what you're doing, of course. But in this case, my skin, it doesn't need to be at 90 IRE here, this little waveform where his skin's blown out. Ideally, in most scenarios and in most lighting environments, you try and light the face on the camera to be around, if someone has like white Caucasian skin, to be around like 70 IRE. This little line right here, 70 to 80. If they're really white like me, maybe it's 80 because they kind of are a little more. If they have darker skin, they're more tan. Maybe they're typically they fall between like the 60s or 50s. African American skin tone, maybe like in the 50s or 55s. And that's like how you don't want their skin to be, you don't want someone's really dark skin to be really bright. It's just unnatural. So right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that the exposure of the skin is good. And then once that is done, I'm going to do some tweaks with the skin tones. So with the exposure, I like to use some of the whites to really pull this down. And I think that maybe it's a little too dark. I think that he has pretty white skin, so I think that this probably where it was actually was pretty good. And then I'm going to go to my curves. I'm going to use hue versus hue and see if I can pull out any of this magenta color. Maybe I come in a little closer in his face here so I can make sure that what I'm seeing looks good. 100%. Let's see that. Let's see that. So that's what it was like before. Look at that. Look at the magenta. It's very, took me a while to figure that out, like seeing the differences. Just taking that away just a little bit here. That's all you need to do. Boom. Makes a big difference. There's other ways, like you can even see this on this waveform. Look at the red on the waveform, this little peak. And then whenever I took this away, it goes down. It's like you can see the red leaving the image, which is nice. And let's go to the background. Right now we're doing kind of like our fine detailed finishes. Ooh, that gets kind of crazy if you do that. But like what I could do is maybe I do pull away a little bit of this orange. I don't want to go all the way down, of course, but maybe I do pull a little bit away. Make sure that his face isn't like I'm losing a lot of information when I pull away some of the orange color. I think that it's worth to take a little bit of orange color away. It makes his skin stand out. This doesn't look so orange. Maybe it's from lights, maybe it's from something else. And then there's this like kind of yellow back there. I like to use this sometimes to just kind of really finally tweak some things. If you're in DaVinci Resolve, you can do this stuff a lot better, but Premiere, you kind of, you got what you got. Maybe that's taking a little bit too. You don't want to do too much with this sometimes because then you can start really creating some weird stuff on the face. But skin tone is always first for me, so I want to make sure the skin is looking good. I still think it looks pretty good. And I want to here's the next thing that I like to do with interviews is I like to, so we have this Lumetri color. I want to add another Lumetri color that's in my effects panel. Let's hear my effects controls. What is going on with this thing over here? Can add another Lumetri color. Boom. There's two. I'm going to name this one something different. I name it Vin. The reason why it's named Vin because do I have two? Let's take that away. So this other Lumetri color has nothing on it. I'm adding this as Vin because what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of vignette so that we focus on Mitch here. So instead of coming to this vignette and using this tool, which I purposely don't think it does that much many times. It's like a little bit too much around the corners. I want to have my own control. So I go to the vignette tool and then I come here to the, where am I? Oh, no wonder. That weird stuff going on. So cut that. All right, so I have the vignette tool here, and instead of going here to the vignette tool so I have my new adjustment layer, and instead of going to here, like the original Lumetri color, and just adding a vignette here, I don't like the control that it gives me. I feel like I don't have as much as I want. And so what I do is I add another Lumetri color below that. You can see it here as well. Add the other Lumetri color below it, and I create one myself. So I go here to mask. I create a little mask here. I pull these out here for like a feather. Kind of feathers the image out, makes it where it's not so sharp. Start creating like my own little vignette. I come here, I press invert. So now everything that I'm going to be correcting is going to be on the outside, not the inside. And then I go to the curves. Instead of going to, exposure, go to the curves, and I want to just bring down my midpoint here. So just bringing down the midpoint here. Let's turn this guy so we're not seeing those edges. Now I'm just bringing down the midpoint. It's just a little bit, makes a big difference. And maybe I pull this, maybe this is a little bit too down here. I'm liking that. This is looking nice to me. So this is what we got of Mitch. Look at that smile. So this is what it was like before. Okay. Now, this is what it's like after. I think it looks pretty nice. So this is with everything off. Pretty flat image. We put the Lumetri on, the Phantom LUT. Then we added just we looked at our waveform here, our Lumetri scopes, and we did our corrections with our skin. We did our corrections with the contrast, the exposure. We went here and we tweaked around with stuff. And then afterwards, we did some fine tuning. We took away some colors here. We took away some colors on the face. And then we added the Lumetri colors. And then afterwards, this is what we get. And I think it looks pretty nice. And maybe I changed some things later. I'm kind of seeing how I was taking out the background. I'm seeing a little bit of change here with the skin. Maybe that's too much. Let's take a look and see if it is too much. No, I think it's pretty good. But there we go. This is a kind of a longer video. It's almost like a tutorial for my basics of doing color grading. Going back here. Oh, this is still looking like a little bit. Maybe I just bring it down. Yeah, there we go. See, like I said, you got to go back sometimes, look at your images. This is kind of like what I do for all my clips, the run through that I do. I don't use too many fancy tricks and, bells and whistles to make things look good. I use a really great LUT that makes my camera look better and the images come out with correct colors. And then I just do fine tune adjustments like white balance, color correction, contrast, exposure, and that is it. You know, if there are two tips, or if there's one of the most important tips that I could tell you is, first, expose your camera well. Second, know how to color correct. Know how to make your image look white, and making sure that you do that while you're filming is important, but sometimes it's not perfect. So color correcting is so important to make your image look the way that it should, and then you can make it warm or change it, but that's really important. And then just understanding the waveform, and if you can do that, then you can do a lot of things. But I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I know that it was a longer kind of walkthrough tutorial, but it is, I don't know, that's kind of fun. Oh, and the one thing that I almost forgot about, a big tip. This is something that, can really change everything that you create, depending especially how you're coloring your images, is making sure that what you are coloring your images on is on a color corrected monitor. Basically, what that means is that the monitor is color accurate and there's not any shifts in colors, magenta, greens, that it is the right contrast. And if you're editing on a monitor that's slightly green, well, all your images are going to be off and they're not going to be right. So whenever you're going through and edit, and if you don't have a color corrected monitor, that's why I have this right here. I have my MacBook Pro out, because for the most part, these monitors are amazing, and a lot of your clients and most people might be viewing maybe on this MacBook Pro. And so I'm editing on the MacBook Pro because it gives me great contrast and great color corrected images. Now, this monitor is nice. It's actually a video production monitor that's supposed to be color corrected, but I ran into a project recently where all my images and the skin of people were kind of more magenta like, and I figured out it was because this monitor wasn't correct, and the creative director I was working with was on his MacBook Pro. And I went and looked at my MacBook Pro and it was all off. And I was like, oh gosh, he's right. And so making sure that whenever you finish a video, look on your computer, look on a different monitor, go to your phone, watch it on your phone, watch it on your TV. What does it look like on your TV? That is like the ultimate way to make sure that what you're creating is accurate, it's correct, and that it looks good for other viewers, which everyone wants their stuff to look good. So thank you again for watching this. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you subscribe, and maybe it'd be great if you went down the comments and you let me know, like, hey, can you break down more of this? Can you show more of this, of how you do this? Show more of your camera stuff, show more of the editing process. I would love to get your thoughts on like what you like more. And also, is this nice to have a longer format video? I'm not sure if you like it, or maybe if it was just easier for me to explain. Do you want it to be shorter? It'd be great to know, because I want to make this better so that you enjoy it and that it's better and helpful for you. So thanks so much. This is the best basics of color correcting for me, and have a great day. Bye.